All right, everybody. Welcome to today's show with Dr. Gary Habermas, someone I've admired dearly, dearly, and I really, really love his work. I am really amazed at the kind of things he has done, bringing rigor to historical research about Jesus and Christian origins. I really admire your work. How are you, Dr. Habermas? How are you doing today?
I am doing well. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Look at our backgrounds. Who has better background? Who has better
Uh, well, it doesn't make a difference how the books are piled. I like the fact that there's books all over the place. That's a good
I,
sign.
I do too. I do too. All right, so let's start with the first question that we had, and I mean, I'm going to be letting Pine Creek in a bit, but the first question I really wanted to get into, and this is something I don't think we got into last time, is your thoughts on Richard Carrier's research. Now, for those that don't know, Richard Carrier, I've spoken with him. I really enjoy some of his stuff. Has argued that there is no real good evidence for Jesus Christ, and so on and so forth. How do you respond to some of those ideas? I guess.
I think his biggest problem is that he has to answer the many, many objections by the entire scholarly community of those who are university. Well, as Bart Ehrman says it, Carrier's issue is that he's got good credentials, but he does not hold a position in an accredited university, college, or seminary. Now that's what Bart Ehrman says, and it's not. And unless somebody thinks, oh, that's Bart's prejudice. He thinks everybody needs to be teaching college. Unless somebody thinks that's it, that comment about him not teaching because people don't respect that view in an academia, it is in the midst of 20 pages of critique in his book, Did Jesus Exist? And he acknowledges Richard's good training, and that's true. That can't be doubted. But Bart goes off on his Jesus never lived for 20 pages he handles the legend thesis, but for that whole book, Bart Ehrman's entire book, he goes off on the view that we don't have sources for Jesus. And I mean I could expand that if you want to, but Ehrman, who's an atheist, a New Testament specialist and an atheist, gives several major arguments for why Jesus has to be considered an historical figure. I can give as many as you want.
Okay, so just a little bit before we start taking viewer questions and discussion with Pine Creek, just to clarify, what do you make of Dr. Carrier's argument specifically about the celestial Jesus that we don't find any concrete historical evidence in Paul or his quote authentic letters? Is there any credibility to that for you as a historian?
Okay, I'm missing a little bit of your question. Are you saying Carrier's critique that Paul says too little about the historical Jesus?
Yes, yes,
Is that your
exactly.
point?
Yeah, and that this is evidence. Well, he has a new book called Jesus from Outer Space, where he argues that the earliest Christians really saw Jesus as a celestial figure.
Yeah, I think that's a real long shot. And to make a few comments, Morris Casey. Now, cite these kind of folks on purpose because they're not believers, and so as non-believers, people like Garrett Ludeman, who just passed away recently, a few months ago, Garrett Ludeman, um, Morris Casey, and or Maurice Casey, and Bart Ehrman are good examples of non-Christians. And Morris Casey goes off on that critique. He also has a whole book on the mythers, and he says one of the big problems is they think Paul doesn't say much because Paul doesn't delineate facts. And then he stops for a moment. This is Casey, the agnostic. And Casey stops and he goes, for crying out loud, he said, Paul had to have given them all kinds of historical background because we find these dozen things about Jesus in Paul. And on top of that, when the epistles are written, it's boom. It comes right out with exploding uh, comments about Jesus' deity, and the author Paul never says. Now, y'all aren't familiar with the title Son of God. You aren't familiar with the Jewish concept of Lord because you're not a Jewish audience. Let me explain it to you. He doesn't do any of that. He just starts out right away talking. And we have to do, for example, his very first book, First Thessalonians, dated in 50 AD, sometimes as early as 48 AD. That's only plus 20 after the cross. And in First Thessalonians, he starts out with what Richard Bauckham calls a high Christology. He starts calling Jesus Lord, Son of God, and so on. Now, people might say, well, Jesus isn't God. Let's just say they might say that. The answer from Casey and Ehrman and Ludeman and others is nobody's saying that Jesus is God, not the skeptics anyway. They're not saying he's God. They're saying Paul puts those things in the letters without ever explaining them. That's an example of why he thinks his audience already knows what's going on. And as Casey says, that's typical of the other historical evidence Paul's given him elsewhere. The way he writes shows he's already given a historical background. I went on too long there, but basically what I like is these are unbelievers who are answering that question.
All right, that was wonderful. So one more question before we get to Doug. I know he is dying to ask. He's a big fan of yours. He's been following you for years. But before we get to his question, we want one more that came in, which is many people are doubtful that resurrection, I guess, history is even a job of a historian because they think you have to have methodological naturalism, so on and so forth. How do you respond to that? Because I mean, you encounter this a lot, even with people who apparently don't have an axe to grind. They're going to say, I have nothing against Christianity, like Bart Ehrman, but they're going to say, well, it's not up to a historian to confirm miracles, right? Historians are only concerned with naturalism. So how do you, I guess, battle against that?
Do you want a list of reasons? I mean, I give you a whole list if you want. Here's a few. First off, I kind of agree with a bit of that critique. I agree with a bit of it. I have doubts about whether professional historians are going to be happy, and happy's not the point, but whether they have the tools to investigate a resurrection and the theological ramifications of it, because they could easily say, hey, my field is European history. My field is this or that. It's not miracles. I don't have any tools. So I have a little bit of agreement with that. My TA, who's very close to me, he's in the meantime, my teaching assistant, he's got a PhD, just finished it. He argues the opposite way. He just wrote a dissertation saying against me, saying that historians can unpack this material. And so the field is mixed. Several other things. I think a few of the skeptics cheat a little bit because they'll say, historians can't investigate miracles. And to me, that's not the question. The question is not, can they investigate miracles, which I also have doubts about, as I just said. But I'm saying, let's not ask if it's a miracle. A miracle, by definition, even from the skeptic David Hume, has to be from God's hand. He says a miracle is an extraordinary event brought about by God or an invisible agent. But we don't have to investigate the question of whether the resurrection was a miracle. We can ask the question, did this man named Jesus die on the cross? Was this man Jesus seen afterwards? Those are historical questions. Did he die on the cross? Was he seen after he died on the cross? We don't have to say, now, did God do it? Now, I don't think that's a fair question to ask the historian because they haven't studied that latter question about miracles.
Right. Yeah.
But as far as the man Jesus walking and talking on earth, doing many things, dying on the cross, and was he seen later? Those are historical questions, very clearly.
All right. Well, I've been getting so many things to do. Okay, Doug, you've been a big fan of Habermas for a long time.
Well, I don't know if fan's the right word, but I have been following you, Gary, for a long time.
Right.
And so I have a whole bunch of questions I'd love to ask you, but I want to put all my cards on the table. Like, I'm not a Christian. I'm an atheist. I used to be a Christian, but if you're a Calvinist leaning, then I would say I profess to be a Christian. And one thing that I think Christians like about me is I can sometimes resonate with them. And one thing that I think they would say is that something that apologists, and I know you're a historian, but would you call yourself an apologist as well?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, okay.
Because I would use the history and the philosophy, which is my background. I would use it to answer those questions.
Yeah. And so one, I think, criticism that a lot of Christians might have of apologists like you is that sometimes apologists can sound like politicians. And so when a question is asked, by the time the answer is complete, it's like, what was the question again? You know what I'm saying? Is there a delay?
I think so. But I would say the complaint that somebody, as an historian or philosopher or New Testament scholar, sounds like a politician and goes on, if that's the part of that second question, I think that could be answered in several ways. Make your answers shorter.
Right.
The fact that in politics, we generally don't like one view, but we love another view. So politics are okay with us if it's our view. So I think to say, oh, they sound like politicians is another way to say, I don't like what they're saying. And if that's because they do like some politicians, and if that's what they're saying, then I would say, buckle down and answer the questions.
Yeah.
If you don't like going on and being a politician, then answer the guy's questions. And that's what I would say.
Okay. Yeah. I saying this is because since I have some questions, I'll get right into it. But please just, if you can answer it in one question or one word answer, that's great for me.
One word answer depends on what the question is.
Yeah, but
it's very few questions I can answer.
I understand, but if it's possible to answer in one word, then please do. So let's start with the minimal facts, because that's your bread and butter, I think, right? What would you say is the biggest criticism against it, either from non-believers or believers?
Now, how can I answer that yes or no?
No, I'm not asking for yes or no here.
Is that what you're saying?
What's the biggest critique against?
Okay, then I misunderstood you. The critique of the minimal facts.
Yeah.
Yeah, the definition is I use only the facts.
No, what's the critique against it?
What is a critique against it? I think we have a little bit of lag between our voices. I'm not sure, and I'm not hearing all your words. What is the best critique against it?
Yes.
One Christian who doesn't like it, one Christian scholar who doesn't like it, says Habermas only uses a piece of the pie when he could be using the whole pie. Why does he want to tie himself down to a half dozen questions? That's one of the questions I've been hearing lately. Not a half dozen facts. Why do you only want to use 6 facts when you can use dozens of facts, even according to Bart Ehrman, even according to Maurice Casey, the atheist and agnostic commentators? I think that's a good complaint. I think having the whole pie can be better at times than having a piece of the pie. But I stay with the piece of the pie because I have the advantage of having almost every critical scholar on board with me. I'm not even aware of critical scholars who disagree with the 6 facts. And by the way, just in case somebody's saying this, I get blamed with this. I do not say that the empty tomb is one of the 6 facts. I don't say that. I ever have said that.
Okay, I understand that, and I can appreciate that answer. If you had those minimal facts, and if, let's say, someone has a naturalistic explanation and another person like yourself has non-naturalistic explanation, all else being equal, what do you think a person should choose, a naturalistic or a non-naturalistic, if they can both explain the data?
I want to know, or let me ask you, what naturalistic thesis explains all the data?
Okay, can you answer my question first? And then I'll answer yours.
Okay, what question do you want me to answer? Which of those?
If you have 2 hypotheses or 2 explanations, one's completely naturalistic and one is not, let's say supernaturalistic. And they both explain all the data and everything else is all equal. Do you think a person should choose the naturalistic explanation or the supernatural explanation?
I think whichever one says they answer all the facts, the 2 should dialogue until they find out which one has an edge, given about, when I do this big thing on the resurrection, I have 140 questions to discuss. I think if someone's going to come up and say, I can explain all this data with a natural thesis, okay, I'm open. But I'll say two things. I really am open, but I'll say two things. Number one, prove it answers it as well as mine does. And number two, what if I have additional information that there is a supernatural world? What if, for example, near-death experiences indicate that there's an afterlife, which I think is a very, very strong thesis.
Well,
if I already know there's an afterlife,
yeah, I understand.
Wait a minute. Let me keep it to a sentence or two.
Okay.
If there's an afterlife, and if I'm proclaiming that the resurrection is an example of the highly evidenced afterlife, I think both those possibilities should be considered equally, because if there's an afterlife, I want to know if Jesus is part of it. And the other guy says, no, the natural world is better. Okay, one question I would ask is, what's your evidence for naturalism? I can give evidence for supernaturalism. What's your evidence for naturalism?
So Dale Allison,
for naturalism.
Dale Allison, whom you know, right?
Dale Allison, what?
Dale Allison, whom you know.
Yep. He's a friend. Yes.
Yeah, he says that you can give a natural explanation for the minimal facts that you present. And off the top of my head, I think he says something like, you can say that maybe Peter or Mary had a grief hallucination, and then that turned into social contagion. And he said something like, if someone in a small town says, I saw a Bigfoot, well, what do you know? Over the next few months, oh, I saw a Bigfoot too. And you end up having this type of naturalistic explanation that doesn't require any supernatural explanation, because all you're doing is explaining these minimal facts. You don't need, right? So what would you say to Dale Allison about that?
A couple things. You're not putting Dale Allison in context, because Dale Allison, in his two big books on the resurrection, he does accept the minimal facts. He says you got to be open to challenges, which I agree, but he accepts the facts. And secondly, he believes that Jesus appeared to disciples after his death by crucifixion, because he says, like I did, that there's evidence for an afterlife and a supernatural world. In fact, the last time I was with Dale, we were having coffee in a long talk of a couple hours. And I sat down at the table, and before I even sat all the way down, I said, Dale, you know what my favorite sentence is in only the first book was out on the resurrection. I said, you know my favorite sentence is? And he said, what's that? And I said, here's the sentence. It's a pretty close paraphrase. He said, I have no doubt that after Jesus' death by crucifixion, Jesus appeared again to his disciples. That's Dale Allison. I can give you chapter and verse if you want.
Yeah, but Dale Allison will also say that we don't know the nature of these appearances.
That's fine, but that's beside the point. If you're going,
no, it isn't. That's a huge point, because
all right, let's debate.
Pentecostals today, I think you know this. Pentecostals today will say that they saw Jesus, that Jesus appeared to them at 11:10 a.m. during a worship service.
Wait, but
that's great.
Yeah, but
that's right.
I want to clarify.
Do we have data for one kind of appearance or another? Let me make a point. If Jesus appeared to somebody in whatever kind of body, and if you have data that he appeared, that's data for the resurrection. And by the way, Dale Allison says it both ways.
Well, hang on, Gary. Are you saying a minimal fact is that Jesus appeared to people in a body?
I think the minimal fact showed that Jesus appeared. Dale Allison,
right, but not in a body, right?
I do argue for the bodily resurrection, but I don't usually use the minimal facts for that.
I know, but
I think the minimal facts will prove that.
Do you say that is it a minimal fact based on the consensus of New Testament scholarship that Jesus appeared to people in a body?
Okay, I've got a published article from a liberal press where I surveyed a bunch of scholars, and I can only argue for the ones I've surveyed, but there are dozens and dozens. 75% of the scholars said they believe Jesus appeared in some way after his death, and 75% of those who said he appeared bodily. So that's the answer to your two questions. If you like 75% for he appeared, and 75% of those who said he appeared bodily, I think those are large percentages.
Okay, so you're saying that a minimal fact is that Jesus appeared to people in bodily form.
I think that's where the argument heads. Yes, but let me make
No, not heads, but as a minimal fact. You're saying
I'm
you're
not
jumping to the
hedging.
conclusion.
It comes from my arguments, but I want to cite Dale because he's your hero here, and you brought him up. So Dale says the New Testament view is that he appeared bodily. He says, but he said, I'm rather Platonic. I don't need bodily appearances. I'm fine with them, but I don't need them. He said, but if he appeared without a body, he still appeared. That's still a resurrection. Now, if somebody says I had a dream last night or I was praying last night and he appeared in my bedroom, we'd have to talk about that. But I wouldn't want evidence. I'm just saying, if Dale is your man, Dale says disembodied or embodied. And that was what my survey said. Once again, 75% of the scholars, left to right, say Jesus appeared, and 75% of those who said he appeared bodily. So that's 75% said he appeared
50%.
bodily. 25% said he appeared. 25% said he really appeared, but non-bodily. I'm not going to say the second group does not believe in that's not my view. And I think the facts evidence bodily resurrection, and the minimal facts evidence bodily resurrection. It's clearly the New Testament view, and that is the majority critical view today, even from non-Christian New Testament scholars.
Again, I got so many
ahead.
questions, and so I want to keep them short. The answers, if you can. Have you ever met a person who had nothing to do with Christianity? Their parents weren't Christians. They became a PhD historian. They looked at the evidence of the resurrection, and they became a Christian because of the historical evidence for the resurrection. Do you know anybody? Because I want to interview that person.
I can give you a list of PhDs in either straight history or in New Testament history, but history. Dale Allison called himself an historian. Bart Ehrman called himself an historian. And Bart Ehrman does not believe in the resurrection.
Dale Allison understand my question? My question is, do you know anyone who was not a Christian,
they were converted,
that they became a PhD in history, and then they looked at the evidence for the resurrection, and then they became a Christian because of that evidence for the resurrection? Do you know anybody like that?
Yeah, I think I could send you a few names if you want me to.
Sure, I'd love it.
There are a number of them. Now, there is a difference. If this is what you're getting at, there is a difference between those who say, Allison's an example, there's a difference between those who say the data are really good and maybe don't answer the question of whether they themselves believe in it, but they'll say the data are very good.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking that it actually convinced them and they became Christians.
Because of the resurrection.
Because of the evidence, the historical evidence.
Yes, I think there are examples. Like I said, I want to differentiate that so you don't say to me later, no, New Testament historians are not historians. Or
okay, you can send that to me later through Josh. I'd love to interview them. So,
yeah, you send me an email when this is over, and I'll send you some people you can interview.
Because I have found none. I've had this challenge for years, and I have found none. Okay. Some people mention dead people, but I want someone alive so I can interview. But
well, that's probably a prerequisite.
Would you admit to the Christian audience that things like in the Gospel of John, when it says that Jesus said that I and the Father are one, that those are not facts based on consensus of historians?
I'd never even addressed that.
I know, but would you say that that's a fact?
Let me make a stronger one. I think the clearest case of Jesus doing that kind of thing is in Mark 14, 61 to 64, where the high priest asks, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" And he says, "Ego eimi," in the Greek, "I am." And henceforth you'll see the Son of Man riding on the clouds, which is only a prerogative of God in Scripture, and seated on the right hand of God. And the high priest tears his garment, an official proclamation of blasphemy, and says, "This man is blasphemed. What do you think?"
I know the text, but that's not my question. My question is, do you think that based on the consensus of historians, they would say that's a fact in history?
I don't know. I have not studied what the consensus of historians think about John 10.
Okay.
I and the Father one. I do not know their view. That's not my area.
Would you say
I've
would you
never
say,
interviewed.
okay, that's a fair
I
answer.
would think they probably wouldn't. I would think they
Okay.
probably would not like the verse in John, but the one in Mark is entirely open, and he even goes further than John does.
Would you
But
say that based on the consensus of historians that they would say it's a fact that Jesus walked on water?
probably not. It is a consensus of New Testament historians and critical historians who, you have to realize, critical historians who look at these things are very rare compared, because it's not their area. They're doing American history, North American history, European history, everything. But I will tell you this: I just read a critic recently who said all critical scholars, and I don't think it's that unanimous, but this critic said all critical scholars today believe Jesus healed and exercised. Now, that's not walking on water, but that's a comment about healing and exercising. No, I don't think the majority of scholars, critical, non-Christian, if you want, scholars would say Jesus walked on water. I don't think they would agree.
Yeah, I would agree. From my understanding,
that's not my area.
I know. But the point of I have all my cards on the table, full disclosure. The point of this is that I bet you if we were to put everything that you would say is a minimal fact on one side of a piece of paper and everything that the consensus of historians would say is not a fact, we would have a short little piece on the left and a long list of non-facts on the right.
Let me tell you why that's a non sequitur. I only do 6 facts. 6 by definition. Remember, I already said, and I'm glad I said it before you said that. A whole pie view, all the facts we can get from the New Testament, is more than 6. So I realize I'm only using 6. From those 6, I only argue death and resurrection. Sometimes I argue that he claimed to be deity. Deity, death, resurrection.
I understand all that. You don't have to tell me this because I know this already.
Why are you asking me questions about things I haven't studied? And do I believe in the majority of this and that? And that's not what I'm trying to argue.
Well, no. In order for you to have determined what is a minimal fact, you have to exclude what's not a fact based on consensus. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Right.
Getting closer to something here. If you produce, I'll tell you what I believe about that. If you produced a list of 20, let's say, what you think are contradictions in the Gospels. I'll make it hard, not just differences. Let's say contradictions in the Gospels. You're going to find 20 of them, but they don't mess with my 6 minimal facts. I'm going to say you keep what you think are contradictions, and I'll keep the death and resurrection of Jesus based on the minimal facts. And if Jesus is died and raised again, we could go after and discuss whether the other ones are contradictions later, but you're not messing with my conclusion. You're not disproving my view that he died on the cross and was raised from the dead and was seen by his apostles afterwards, with Dale Allison concedes. Okay, so if you're going to say, yeah, but look at all the stuff in the other Gospels. I'm not doing all the other facts in the Gospels. I want 6 for a reason.
I want to move on to the principle of analogy because I think that's what's a big hindrance to non-believers. Even Jews and Muslims who accept the supernatural, they still, will struggle with these things. It's just hard to believe that certain miraculous things happen. And what would it take to convince people that the miraculous did happen? So I have come up with the flying man thought experiment. And the purpose is not to make anyone look silly or push back, but just see, I bet you and I, Gary, are very similar in what we accept or don't accept if we hear claims. So here's how it goes. We're walking in the forest and we stumble upon a partially buried book. We go, what's this? You and I open it up, and we just open it up at a random page. And on the random page, it says that a guy named Myron flew unaided across the Grand Canyon, flew unaided across the Grand Canyon. Now, I don't need a long explanation of why. I'm just asking, would you believe that happened in history if that's all you read at that point?
I would tend not to believe it, and whether I believe in whatever my belief. No, I wouldn't believe it from just picking up the book. But okay. I would require
no buts. So let's just go one at a time here, okay?
What do you want me to answer? You keep cutting me off every time I say 2 words, and you go on for a minute.
My question is, would you?
No, I'm going to keep talking because that's what you do. You ask me a question, I start to answer. You cut me off and go into another question. I would like to be able to answer your stinking question. If you don't want to ask me a question, don't ask it.
All right,
but if
guys,
you do, wait for the answer.
All right, Dr. Look, Pine Creek, this shouldn't be like turning into a debate. This should be more like a discussion.
Well, he answered the question. I asked him, would you believe it? He said no. And so I wanted to move on to the next question.
And I said, and I'm in the middle of saying something that you probably would agree with, I would require a lot of evidence for it. But no, you cut me off and go, wow, what about a different kind of flying guy going across a lake this time? I don't care what you're saying.
No.
First of all, that's not my argument. You're making things up that are not my minimal fact arguments.
Gary, the point of this thing is to see the principle of analogy, that we're the same. Because I agree with you. I wouldn't believe it either. But now let me add, I'm going to add piece by piece, full disclosure, piece by piece, the evidence for the resurrection.
Yes.
I'm going to apply to the flying man. So let's say we flip the page and it says that Myron flew in front of 500. He flew in front of his 12 friends and finally to the author of this book, this letter. Yeah. Would you believe it now?
Not when I don't know who Myron is. I don't have a clue what his background is. I don't know anything about him. Now, if you switch to Jesus Christ, and critics, I have to keep saying this, and you don't like me saying it, but the vast majority of critics believe that Jesus was a miracle worker. The vast majority of critics believed he exorcised, whatever that means. He believed he was exorcising demons, so did the people. They believed it. If I know these things about Jesus, he lived probably the most famous ethical life in the history of the world. He had great teachings. He is praised in every major religion in the world. Now you go, now what if he appeared? That is your example of whatever the guy's name is, Myron, whatever. I'm not quite hearing you, but there's no analogy between Myron and Jesus because you have no background. You want me to believe a guy who hasn't been around, has never healed anybody, never exercises, never lives in.
Okay, good point. Good point. So now we flip
it in the.
So we flip the page.
Life of Jesus.
So we flip the page and it says that Myron was known as a miracle worker far and wide. He walked on water as well as fly. He multiplied loaves and fishes. Would you believe it now? No, because I have to know a whole lot about his life. What kind of an ethical life does he live? Is he into magic? Are any of these doing? I would ask the same questions you do about naturalistic theories. Okay.
And I would welcome you to make up a naturalistic theory about the resurrection since you like Myron so much. If
That's a good question.
Make a naturalistic theory about Myron, make a naturalistic theory about Jesus. Go for it. Tell me what happened with the resurrection.
If Myron did lead, if you became convinced Myron did lead a very ethical life, are you saying that you would be more likely to believe he flew across the Grand Canyon?
If you showed me a bunch of evidence, there's a bunch of other areas now, and I start applying naturalistic theories, and I don't think it's magic. I don't think it's trick photography. If I'm watching this on a film, I don't think it's photoshopped. If I can do a check, things would start coming together better. But I'm still a mile away from believing he flew across the Grand Canyon. But can I ask you a question finally?
Sure.
What naturalistic theory are you going to propose that's just as good as the resurrection data for what happened to Jesus? One theory. What is your favorite naturalistic
I'll
theory?
choose the same one as Dale Ellison said when he talked to, I think it was Nathan on Digital Gnosis on August 12th, 2021. I have the transcript here. He said that the tomb is empty and you see the person, you say, oh, the resurrection of the dead has begun. So you have this idea that people at that time believed in the resurrection of the dead, or Jesus had risen from the dead. And probably what you would do, this is where it starts, you would argue, and I would argue, that there was a social contagion, a psychological contagion. Once one, maybe two people see Jesus, then it just becomes kind of like, once it's odd, and then he goes into the Bigfoot thing I said earlier. And so he goes on. I can send this to you, and he gives a naturalistic explanation.
No, that's enough. I'm familiar with that theory, and I can tell you 5 other skeptics that hold that theory. But I can ask you this very simple question. So, one person, 2, 3 people, whatever you said, believe he was raised from the dead. Social contagion, the belief that he was raised from the dead spreads, and so on and so on. Now you've got people like the Jesus Seminar rates the appearance to Paul red, which is an almost sure event. At least Paul thought so. Peter is pink. They also said to the women, that's the Jesus Seminar who reject 90% of Jesus's red letter words. Mm-hmm. Okay. Not that they believe those things, but they believe that that's the way they rate the events in his life. You have to argue with them on the colors. Red is the highest anybody can get on any fact, and they rate them that way. If these things happened, are you going to believe that you got a red for Paul, a pink for Peter, according to the Jesus Seminar, and a red or pink? They don't give a color for the women, but they added a footnote that the women also saw him. You've got multiple people seeing him, whatever it amounts to. I want to know how social contagion and an idea spreading to 2, 3, 4, 10, 12 people can account for all of them being willing to die. And we have first century sources for the martyrdoms of Paul, Peter, and James, the brother
I forget.
of
Do
Jesus.
you use martyrdom as a minimal fact?
Who?
Do you use martyrdom as a minimal fact?
No, I believe that the disciples.
Why are you bringing up other facts then? We're
Because
talking about explaining the minimal facts.
Not.
I think this is getting too heated for my liking.
No, it's not heated at all. We're being very honest with each other, and because we're talking about we're talking about this because you're saying, Doug, give a natural explanation for the minimal facts, and I basically said exactly what Dale Allison said, and now you're bringing up martyrdom, which has nothing to do with the minimal facts.
Can I answer your question? Number one, Dale Allison may have said that, but he doesn't believe it because he believes in the resurrection appearances. He said so. Secondly, my third fact is that the disciples were transformed to the point of being willing to die. That is a minimal fact. And
it is. Okay, that's what I asked. Okay.
It is. And I simply footnoted that I don't have to have deaths for the disciples to make my point, but I just added, like you would add a footnote in a manuscript. I said we have first century evidence for the deaths of Peter, Paul, and James, 2 previous non-Christians. Okay. But my minimal fact is, I'll state it for you, just that one. The disciples, they had experiences, and then as a result, here it is, they were transformed to the point of being willing to die for their faith. That's my point. Then I added a footnote. By the way, we have first century sources, 3 of them. But the point is willing to die. That's a minimal fact, yes.
Okay. I would love to bring up I don't know if you can see it, Gary, but I came up with the minimal facts for Mormonism. Can you see that?
No. I can see the word facts, and I can see Joseph Smith.
Okay, well, let me just read it to you. So here's the minimal facts for Mormonism. Joseph Smith taught from the beginning. He was translating from the plates. I'm sure you could find 19th century historians would say that's what the Mormons, that's what Joseph Smith taught. Minimal fact number 2, Joseph Smith's 3 witnesses, Harris, Cowdery, and Whitmore, at the same time saw the angel Moroni and the golden plates. Therefore, it's not a hallucination because we got witnesses. Number 3, Joseph Smith and his followers were willing to suffer and endure martyrdom for their preaching. He never recanted. Minimal fact number 4, Joseph Smith was an uneducated farm boy who could not have written the Book of Mormon. Therefore, it's not natural in origin. So I don't believe in that Mormonism is true, and I'm sure you don't either. What is the natural explanation for these 4 minimal facts?
Okay, how about the view that, I have to check this out, but this is what I understand. It's pretty close to this. It's not exactly this. If you look at the front of the Book of Mormon, that tells you, or at least some of the copies, that tell you who the witnesses were to the plates that Joseph received from Moroni. Okay, those witnesses who are listed there, who's not counting the ones whose name is Smith, the other ones either left the faith or apostatized, got kicked out of the church.
But we're talking about minimal facts. You're bringing in other facts. How do you explain these minimal facts?
No, I don't have any idea what you're asking. I'm responding. My minimal facts say Jesus' disciples were willing to die for their faith. You're going, well, don't bring that up. That's a different thing. No, it's one of my minimal facts. And I'm saying if you apply that to Joseph Smith,
okay, yes, I take it back.
But these people all walk away from their faith. Would it bother me if Peter walked away from his faith and gave up? Would it bother me if Paul said later, I've waited for too long, Jesus hasn't returned, I'm leaving? Would that bother me? Absolutely. Would it bother me if one of them said, I've been thinking about this, I don't think I really saw him? Yeah, it would tear me up. I don't think I could believe in the resurrection. But the guys in the Joseph Smith illustration, they leave, or they go to another religion, or they're kicked out. Second, I understand it correctly, and I'm no Mormon scholar, but if I understand it correctly, when they saw the golden plates, they were on the table with a cloth over them. They didn't see the actual gold or the plates. They were told, "Oh, yeah, there's golden plates under there," and they're looking at a cloth. They don't see them. Third,
So hang on.
are you aware
Can you
that
stop on that one? Because that's really good what you just said. That they actually didn't see the golden plates. It was under the cloth. But isn't that similar to?
I'm not a Mormon
that
scholar, but I understand they didn't.
Yeah, no, I probably agree with you, but I was just going to point out that one could produce an analogy to Jesus, because the word appeared. That's sort of like having that cloth over the golden plates. In what sense did they really see the golden plates? In what sense did they really see Jesus? Right? Did you see that analogy?
The Greek word. No, because the Greek word, by the way, the Greek word, look this up in a Greek lexicon. The Greek word arao, and Allison will agree with me, Ehrman will agree with me, everyone will agree with me. The Greek word means Jesus initiated the appearance, and he made it so that he was seen. There's no cloth. They saw the person.
I know.
Now, you may
there's
not
no
believe
cloth.
what the text says.
If I may cut in. So, Doug, we have to be fair to Dr. Habermas. I mean, he's been answering your question for 35 minutes. I just want to. He has I just want to take 5 more questions from somebody else in 5 minutes, and we'll be done, because he's gone on for quite a while.
Can I respond to what he said about Dale Allison and the appearance? Because I have a quote from Dale Allison here.
Because we need to move on to really quickly, because I think that Dr. Habermas' time is up, and I mean, we don't want to All right. So, Dr. Habermas, let's really take a couple of more. And I mean, I hope that wasn't too...
Well, can I say thank you and bye? Thank you, Dr. Habermas, for answering my questions. I hope if you want to come on my channel and do it again. Again, my goal here was not to be confrontational, but I really do think that we need to have honest, open dialogue like this and try to keep the bloviation to a minimum and just answer the question, and so we can get more understanding on what's
for my part. I'll make a very brief response. I have no problem with confrontation. I already said that, Joshua, in the email yesterday. I have no problem with hard questions from agnostics. I have no problem. I do have a problem being cut off in almost every one of my answers and being told, we got to move on. I got another one. I got another one. Where the questions can all be asked, but the responses cannot all be given.
I understand. I understand, but
we need to move on. I know that you want to respond.
I know. I was going to ask one thing about the first century Mark thing, because
I'm gonna ask that. Okay, somebody else.
Oh, you're gonna ask it? Okay, perfect. I'll listen on the sidelines. Thanks.
Right. No, you can stay here, but that's fine. Okay, Dr. Habermas, we really will take a couple of questions really quickly, because I know your time is running out. I just want to say I apologize if that was too debatey for you. I didn't I hope that didn't bother you. I mean, this was a person who really wanted to ask you a couple of questions, so I hope that doesn't bother you at all.
I don't mind dialogue, and I don't mind hard dialogue. I just want to be able, in a dialogue, to be able to say my part of the dialogue. That's all I have to say there.
Okay, so Digital Gnosis had a question. Dr. Habermas, will you apologize for saying that we had a first century Mark manuscript which was a forgery obtained by destroying mummy masks or something like that?
If the point of apology is to say I was wrong, yes, I will say I'm wrong. But let me just tell you, I am not a manuscript expert. I was told that by a person who was there. Anybody can disbelieve this, and I will say I'm sorry for giving wrong data, but here's why I did. It was somebody else's data, and I said that. The guy who told me was present with the individual who's the scholar, and he was told by the scholar on his word. That's what it is. It's his word. And this guy's a manuscript scholar too, the one who told me. He says that the fellow thought it was a late first century manuscript. If the comment was wrong, yes, I apologize for saying it. But I want it to be known I was repeating a manuscript scholar who said he was told by the manuscript scholar it was late first century. I'm reporting somebody else's words. So that guy who told me would be mistaken too if this isn't first century. But given that I'm wrong, and I'm not a manuscript scholar. Yes, I shouldn't have said it, I suppose. No, not I suppose. I shouldn't have said it until I had better evidence. I thought pretty good evidence was a guy who was there who was himself a specialist. But yes, I'll apologize for for misleading anybody I misled. Yes.
Okay, so somebody else had a quick question. I know you haven't studied this, but about the nativity accounts, do you think there is still some scholarly support for their historicity as relates to, for example, the star appearing, so on and so forth? What's your view, briefly?
On the what accounts?
The nativity, the Christmas account, Jesus' birth.
Well, I'm between a rock and a hard place because I do a little bit of reading about that, like everybody else does who reads historical Jesus, but I'm not a
Okay,
specialist.
I got it.
So I would say, I think if I got in there, I would be satisfied that the way the New Testament tells the story is a possible way to tell the story. I mean, from what the data we have a fair number of facts. I couldn't even tell you what those facts are because that's just not what I study.
Okay, no worries. That's fine. So really quickly, okay. So somebody wanted to say thank you so much for apologizing. So again, I think it's digital gnosis. Guys, send in questions if you want, but we don't have much time. So does Dr. Habermas think that his desire to believe it was true led him to accept the first century Mark manuscript on insufficient evidence, or no?
Let me read this. Do I think that my desire to believe was true, that led me to accept the first century Mark? Oh, well, let's put it this way. I'm fully willing to say I hoped it was true. And when I heard from a well-known manuscript expert that it was true, by the way, I heard from more than one. I heard from two different ones. When I heard, yeah, I'd have to admit that something would. It'd be like this. Would I be excited if I heard that? I haven't heard the word yet, but I heard hearsay that my son got an A on a very hard exam. Yeah, I got to say that I would just be overjoyed, and I would go, that's wonderful. So yeah, and maybe I can phrase the question this way: did my zeal take over a little bit there? Yeah, that could be. I'll apologize for reporting a fact that was reported incorrectly to me, but still, I'll apologize for reporting an incorrect fact,
No.
and maybe being a little too excited about that. Yeah, that's fine.
So two questions I'm going to ask.
By the way, Josh, what I'm saying is fine is just so nobody doesn't hear me the right way. I'm fine apologizing for it. I'm fine saying, yeah, I was a little too exuberant, probably. Yes, that's fine with that.
All right, so let's do two quickly. So your magnum opus about the resurrection, do we have a date when it's coming out? That was the question. I can't remember who asked. And the second one was, I forgot the second one. Wait. Oh, yeah. The second one is many people claim, including Dr. Richard Carrier, that because the Gospels don't cite sources, this invalidates them or perhaps casts shadow on their historicity. Is it okay for an ancient source to not cite sources, for example, or bibliography or something like that? Let's do the two.
Is it? You kind of I couldn't hear all your words. Is it fair for the gospel writers to do what right at the end of your question?
To not cite sources. So some have said that because the Gospels don't cite sources, they're not good history. They can't qualify as good history.
What if I said, for example, I'm sure Richard knows this, but what if I said that every one of the Gospels used other sources? And sometimes, like in the epistles, Paul says, I gave you what I was given. That's a footnote. He says, I got this from somebody else. The Gospels use other sources. I'll give you a list. Do you want me to give? I don't want to take over from another question. I'll give you sources that each of the four Gospels are reputed to have used. If you want me to do that. If not, you want to go into another question, either one's fine with me.
Yeah, because you're short on time, so we don't want to take too much. So let's do one more here. Again, digital gnosis. Guys, does Habermas think that a desire to believe something on insufficient evidence could have led Jesus' followers to believe he was resurrected?
Do I think that? Okay, so you're asking.
No, it's not me. It's the other guy.
Right. The question there. Do I think that a desire on the part? You know what's interesting about that question, Joshua, is that they didn't believe. Their first response was not to believe. I can give you several examples. They abandoned Jesus in the garden. The men don't show up at the cross. They don't show up at the burial until second stage. They go there to see if the women were telling the truth, but they didn't go to the tomb. When the women come and tell the disciples, not even the resurrection, when the women come and tell the disciples the tomb was empty and the angel said he would appear to us, in Luke 24, the disciples say, come on, ladies, quit spreading, the phrase, idle tales. Quit spreading idle tales. So they dogged the women. They left the garden. They weren't at the cross. They weren't at the burial. And they were hiding. It specifically says in John, they were hiding for fear of the Jews. They didn't come out. When the women did go out, they said, you're wrong. And don't forget, James and Paul are two unbelievers. We had the question earlier today, do people become Christians just for studying resurrection? Well, Paul and James both saw the resurrected Jesus, or at least believed they did, and they both became Christians, and they both died as martyrs. So yeah, I think that's a hard one, because the disciples, I'm not saying they didn't want to believe, but when all these things happened, they ran away. They were fearful. They hid, and they didn't believe the women. When they boldly went to the tomb, brought the word back, the guys didn't believe them. So,
I see.
The disciples a lot of times didn't believe.
Okay, so somebody with a slightly controversial nickname was asked, were there people at the time of Paul who believed that Jesus was replaced and was not killed on the cross?
No.
Okay.
Not to my knowledge. You mean like, we got the wrong guy, we killed Judas instead, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Not the time of Jesus. Now, there is a Gnostic book,
right,
that teaches that, but it's from if I remember my dates, it's from the 3rd or 4th century. I would not allow a source for the resurrection that is 200 to 300 years after let me count that. 3rd would be 2nd century. I would not count a source that's 150 to 250 years later, but you said at that time, all in caps, the answer is no.
Okay. So, quick question. Is there any critical historian currently who uses either the Quran or the Hadiths as a reliable guide to what the historical Jesus did?
Not the guys that I know and read, not the guys that are New Testament scholars, not the guys, and again, you can use all unbelievers if you want, but Bart Ehrman, an atheist, Garrett Ludeman, an atheist, Maurice Casey, an agnostic, Gezer Vermesh, a Jewish non-Christian, Pinchas Lapid, a Jewish non-Christian. I'm not aware of any, even of the non-Christians who say that.
Okay. Let me see here. I don't want to take. Okay, Digital Gnosis again wants to ask. I can't make out this question, but that's fine. What does Habermas think of James Fodor RHBS model as an explanation for the minimal facts?
And what's RHBS?
I don't know. I have no idea. Boris wanted to ask: is it true that so the question is it true that in the 1st century it was common to use the use of mass graves for those crucified?
Yes.
Okay. Canadian Catholic. So somebody went to Dr. Habermas believes that Matthew used. Okay. Does Dr. Habermas believe that Matthew used 90% of Mark and Luke 65% of Mark, like most scholars?
I think that Matthew and Luke, I don't know exact percentages, but I believe that Matthew and Luke both used large portions of Mark. Yes.
Okay. No Way wants to ask, do you consider the fact that mass hypnosis and widespread supernatural cult-like ideas can cause people to truly believe things that are unproven?
Sure. It depends on what you mean are unproven. What if it's a magic trick? What if it's, so-called pulling the rabbit out of the hat? Did you just see that? Yeah, I saw that. Can people be misled by mass hysteria and widespread cult ideas? Yeah, that can happen. The question is whether that would explain resurrection appearances to people who were not believers and who gave the rest of their lives because they believed they did see Jesus and totally change their life. By the way, I'll just throw this out there. A lecture I've been given lately just started actually. There are 5 data points for the resurrection appearances, all before 36 AD. Well, on or before 36 AD. If the cross is 30, there are 5 data points that say this, and this happened. To my knowledge, Bart Ehrman's going to grant all those. To my knowledge, Maurice Casey is going to grant those. To my knowledge, Gezer Vermesh, some of these guys have passed away, but Garrett Ludeman, Gezer Vermesh, Pinchas Lapid, non-Christians would grant those. So it's not your normal, can somebody pull a rabbit out of a hat or mass whatever.
Somebody wants to ask, what does Dr. Habermas know about Hadith science and checking its chain of transmission? If he doesn't know anything about it, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't know much about it, but I've heard from people who do, and they tell me that one Muslim expert told me that two Muslim experts. Now I'm just starting to think about this, but I'm not a Muslim expert. They've told me that the Hadith is often said to be written 100 years after. 100 years is not bad. I have even said publicly that the Quran probably has closer sources than most other religions. Not closer than Christianity, not by a mile, but I think Hadith has Muslim sources are closer to the original than almost any other religion. However, I'm told by Muslim scholars that the Hadith was not all written in 100 AD, that it went on for hundreds of years. And I have a quote that says from a religion scholar who says Hadith was still being pieced together in 11th to 12th centuries. That's 600 years later. I don't, and the Quran itself, which tells you Jesus didn't die on the cross, was 600 years after the event. I don't count that as a historical record.
Right. Somebody want to ask, when does Dr. Habermas date the Synoptic Gospels? Does he agree with the 60 to 90 date, or does he date them earlier?
Dates I would use are one thing. I mean, dates where I would be. But when I do my evidences, I use the critical dates. So I'd say 70 for Mark, 80 for Matthew, 85 for Luke, 95 for John. And I'll just add the last one, John. Bart Ehrman dates at 90 to 95. So he even has it a couple years earlier than I do. So yeah, I use the normal dates for the Synoptics and John.
Okay, let me see really quickly. I don't want to miss anything. Okay, so wait, I'm missing something here. Okay, so somebody wanted to ask, what do you make of Jesus? What do you make of Paul saying that? Okay, I think I understand what they mean. So people like Carrier make the argument that Jesus, when he was talking about, Paul, when he was talking about the Jesus tradition and so on and so forth, was not talking about a Jesus in history or something, but he was talking about knowing things from the scriptures. So he was reading the scriptures and, going along with stuff. What do you make of those arguments? The idea that Paul's knowledge didn't derive from apostles, but rather from his esoteric reading of the Old Testament.
Totally false. And the best argument for that, which critics accept, Bart Ehrman says this is one of the two best arguments for the historicity of Jesus, that when Paul went to Jerusalem 3 years after his conversion, so that places it at 35 to 36, 3 years after his conversion, which everybody puts it 2 to 3 years after the cross. So you got, let's say 2.5, that's an average. He goes up to Jerusalem 3 years later, what is that? 5.5. He goes to Jerusalem, and for 15 days he talked to Peter and James. He goes back to Jerusalem years later, still before the first New Testament book, talked to them about the gospel, and he said all of us were on the same page. And the all of us there, he names them, are Peter, James the brother of Jesus, John, and Paul, the four most influential scholars, foremost influential leaders in church history. So to say he got it from the Old Testament, not from people, is just wrong. And I think very close to every New Testament scholar will agree with me.
Right. Dr. Habermas, I think we missed one question, though.
Right.
I mean, I think I asked, but we kind of forgot to address it. When is your magnum opus coming out? The book about.
Oh, by the way, you've got another question up there too. Leon Festinger's. Is that was the answer to the question earlier, or we didn't, or asked what the letters meant?
But this is a question about from Digital Gnosis. Has Gary read Leon Festinger's work on prophecy? You have.
Yes, I'm very familiar with it.
And does he think it could be applied to the resurrection idea, that is, Jesus as a failed apocalyptic prophet?
No, it doesn't, because what Festinger is applying it to would be like the Jehovah's Witness, the Seventh-day Adventists who go out on the mountain because someone predicted that Jesus was coming. I think it was 1844 or thereabouts, and they sold everything and they went out on the mountain and he didn't appear. And what Festinger's theory is, they reinterpreted it and said, maybe he's coming in another year, and he still didn't come. Jehovah's Witnesses do the same thing. They have two dates at least two for when Jesus appeared, never came. And they reinterpret their religion. That's Festinger. I would say no, because this is not, it's not even close as an analogy. They said, someone has a prophecy and they go out to wait for Jesus. He doesn't come. The point with the Gospels always is that Jesus showed himself face to face to many times, groups of people, individuals. That's about another reason why Paul's not citing the Old Testament. The list that he gives in 1 Corinthians 15 does not include a single Old Testament source, and there's 5 of them. So, so in other words, Jesus is appearing face to face and showing himself. That's not the same as somebody going, I think he's going to come back next year, and he doesn't come back, and we're all heartbroken because he didn't come when you predicted he would come back, not Jesus, you. And it's just not close. And I think if they reinterpreted their religion and kept on believing in it, in spite of the going out in the mountain and Jesus not there, if they were, I'll bet you a bunch of people would fall away too. We don't study that. We talk about the ones who stayed, and that supports Messenger, but not all of them did.
All right, let's do a couple of more, and that's it. We're done. So
that's fine. You're fine.
No. So let's do this one. When does your book come out on the resurrection, the Magnum Opus?
Well, it's not going to be out for a few years. Now, when I have to hand the manuscript in is a lot closer. But when I get the manuscript in, it's going to be a minimum of 2 years for. And it's not going to come out in one volume. It's going to be multi. So we're waiting. I can be done and hand it in, but that's not the same as coming out.
Right. Your final verdict on the Shroud of Turin. Basically, what do you think? Do you think it's not worth exploring? Worth exploring? Do you take a stance on it?
Worth exploring. And I teasingly tell people, I probably make the Shroud crowd, as they're sometimes called. I've written I co-authored 2 books in the Shroud with one of the scientists that were there for the investigation. I may make them upset when I say this, but I'll say teasingly that where I am on the Shroud depends on how I feel when I wake up in the morning. Is it a sunny day? Is the sun shining? Is it overcast? In the one case, I might be 70%. In another case, I might be 90%. I'm just kidding around. But my percentages go up and down depending on the latest scientific test and discovery, which is the way our faith should be. The kind of faith that depends on scientific discoveries, like will this drug work with this disease? It should go up and down based on the evidence. And so my evidence in the Shroud, I'm quite positive as a general rule. But yeah, it goes up and down depending on the latest things I read from science.
Asad Putin wants to ask, could you please ask Dr. Habermas? Could you please ask Dr. Habermas why the ruler was quick to believe John the Baptist? Why the ruler who was quick to believe John the Baptist was raised alive after his death in Mark 6:14-16 when he did not? Not sure the question is for him.
That's Herod.
Okay, Herod. Okay,
yeah. Well, I mean, you'd have to know who Herod is and whether he's, you have to ask, what's his background? Jewish, Gentile, what is it? But, in the Old Testament, you have people, they were brought back to dead. They had to die again. But Elijah, Elisha, in the New Testament, Jesus raises 3 people from the dead. Peter raises a little girl from the dead in the book of Acts. These things happen. The fact that somebody gets wind of that and says, maybe John the Baptist, who was considered a prophet, right? If somebody said, maybe John the Baptist raised after his dead, I suppose somebody could say either John the Baptist has been raised or John the Baptist is Jesus coming back. I mean, people can say whatever they want, but since those stories are around that people are raised from the dead, it's not just Christian stories, but since people are said to be raised from the dead, often mythical figures, it wouldn't be amazing if somebody came up with that and said, hey, could that be this? But of course, just because the question's raised, I would have to wade in there and say, what's the evidence for it?
Somebody wanted to ask, what did you think of Doug? Did you think he was rude, or what was your take of him?
What do I think of whom?
Doug, the person who wanted to ask you questions live.
Do I think he was rude?
Yeah.
Well, I understand. Okay, I do feel that half my questions minimum got cut off after I got 6 words out of my mouth. I wasn't able to answer. His questions took longer to ask sometimes than he gave me words to answer. I don't think that was fair, but at the same time, I realize you probably gave him a certain amount of time to talk, and from your hints, you thought he went over a little bit. He was probably trying to hurry as fast as he could, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say he was trying to be a nice guy, but he wanted to ask me a lot of things, and I didn't get to say everything I wanted to. But it does bug me that if I'm the one that's done the writing, and he hasn't, and he's going to ask me a question about my writing and my life's research, and he asks a question and changes the subject or goes on, or what about this or what about that, before I even get the answer out. When that happens a bunch of times back to back, yeah, it's frustrating.
No worries.
I would say frustrated. I wouldn't say angry or something like that.
Yeah, Digital Gnosis wants to ask, is Gary aware that he himself has added details to the NDE report he tells about the woman seeing digits on a machine that weren't in the original source?
Well, I would like to know what that is because I helped do research on that one and got the report both published and firsthand from the person. So if somebody has other details, I'd like to know who's spreading them and where this comes from. See, I'm going to want to know the exact same questions. I want to know what are the data, who is spreading it, what is their background, and what is their evidence that the story is different from what was recorded. Because, like I said, in that case, the person themselves was interviewed, an eyewitness, and the story has been written up in a reputable source.
Josh Howard wanted to ask, when skeptics are not convinced by the minimal facts, is it primarily due to faulty reasoning, or is it necessary for the Holy Spirit to reveal the knowledge of the risen Christ to them?
First of all, let me encapsulate this in a little bigger question too. I think the majority of people who are not convinced by the minimal facts, if they don't think Jesus was raised from the dead when they started, they probably won't think he's raised from the dead when they're done. That's not a reflection on the minimal facts. As any philosopher who studies philosophy knows, we are more influenced by our worldviews than we are by data. So if I have a worldview that says XYZ is false, I will believe it's false, even if for the time being, I cannot explain the data. So, and I do that. Let me just tell you, when I didn't see his name on the screen. Who was the person who was asking me the question earlier?
Josh Howard?
Who was your Josh? Okay, no. The guy that we were dialoguing with early in the program.
Doug. You mean Doug?
Don?
Doug.
Doug. Okay. I can. Okay, whoever he is, I still don't know his name. I think that people are going to stick with their worldview almost always, no matter what the facts say. And that's because we favor what we believe instead of what someone tells us, even if we can't answer it. I do not think the naturalistic theory he gave about somebody coming to believe something and it spread like wildfire, that view has been, I can tell you chapter and verse who said it when they said it. A few scholars have said that. It's been rejected by virtually every writing scholar because it's not an analogy to the resurrection. So I thought the naturalistic theory he gave, and he's not here to defend himself, so I'm not going to go on and give reasons against it. But I was trying to say that the theory he gave, I think there was another point where I didn't get to finish, but the theory he gave wouldn't start to answer resurrection because they didn't say, I'm in a big group of people that got kind of contagious, and I got caught up in it like at a rock concert. And pretty soon I was thinking this is the best rock group in the world because it spread the contagion. That's not what they said. The Greek literally says Jesus appeared to them. Jesus took the initiative. You can reject it, but it says Jesus appeared to them and they saw him. They saw him as individuals. They saw him in groups. And right away, when you say those things, critics have to go after the groups. They don't like that. But
Yeah.
I don't think the theory, if that's the best theory he can come up with, I think we've got a long way to move between us on checking out the facts. But I'm not going to, you asked me the question. I'm not going to go after him in his absence.
Stephen wanted to ask, Dr. Habermas, will you upload this Q&A on your channel?
Will I do what?
Will you upload this Q&A on your channel?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I don't have any problems with that. In fact, if you'll send me that sentence of permission, your other ones are already up on my channel.
Yeah.
And
everyone has my permission to upload these kind of things.
But I need a statement when you send it to me. When you attach it to an email, tell me in the email, if you would, in writing, that I have permission to do it, and I'll bet you it'll be up there within a day. I'll bet you it'll be up there in a half a week.
Yeah, no worries. That'll be there. Okay, so I don't want to miss any. Okay, so I think Digital Gnosis had another question. Why do we need? So if in NDEs disembodied souls can see without the need for eyes, then why do we have eyes? I guess supposed to be a question.
Well, because we are composite beings. The classical answer, even for non-Christians who take a dualistic answer, is that we are made up of an immaterial and a material substance. That's just who we are. And the immaterial works through the material. And the point about NDEs is that there are dozens of cases, literally dozens of cases. I have a source with 30 of them in it. There are dozens of cases where a person has no measurable heartbeat, no measurable brain waves, and they record data that happened at the same time a distance away that can be verified and is verified. Now, if my brain's not working, if my heart's not working, and I can report data, that starts looking like my thesis, not like the no afterlife thesis.
Yeah, I just sent the video to you with written permission to use it and profit from it.
Excellent. I'll send it to my guy today.
Okay, so I think we are nearing end. I'm sorry, we went over time, which I guess
That's
happens.
all right.
Dr. Habermas, I want to thank you so much for this. You have been wonderful. I think that we went a little bit polemical with Doug. Again, I know you didn't want to debate, but I mean, I can't always control everything. But you were wonderful. I hope we didn't bore you. I hope you're not disappointed. I want to thank everyone who came in here. Okay, we'll ask one last one because this keeps coming up. Okay, Digital Gnosis wants the expectations was for Jesus to bring a political kingdom, and he died on a cross. Would Festinger's cognitive dissonance theory apply?
I don't think would apply to that, because not to the resurrection, because first I don't think his kingdom was political. In fact, when Jesus claimed from the get-go, Mark chapter 1, Jesus came immediately, it says, proclaiming the kingdom of God, and he said, it's here with you. In fact, if critics today believe Jesus healed, and if critics today believe whatever the definition of exorcism is, Jesus was doing it, one of Jesus' sayings is, if I by the finger of God cast out demons, then know that the kingdom has come among you. So it started when he started preaching. But I don't think it was political. I don't think Jesus had hardly a political bone in his body. I don't mean he never said anything political, but I don't think it's a political kingdom. What was the rest of that question? The rest of what I was going to say was it still wouldn't affect the resurrection, because it wouldn't affect the cross. If you're dead, you're dead, no matter what your views are. If you're dead, you're dead. And cognitive dissonance wouldn't apply, because if he's on the cross and he's dead, he's on the cross and he's dead, no matter what the cognitive dissonance is. And secondly, if he really appeared to people, that's just not cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance happens when people fill in the blanks with what they want to believe when what they originally wanted to believe was not true. So you'd have to get the death and resurrection not true before you get they really wanted to believe it. And people like Dale Allison, I give you a long list. People like Dale Allison, Pincus Lapide, a number of people who are not believers say that I can't speak for Dale, but Pincus Lapide is not a believer, was not a believer. He's passed away, but he's a Jewish New Testament specialist, and he says Jesus was raised from the dead. So we have those cases. By the way, I just found another one, a Jewish New Testament scholar who also said Jesus appeared, that the evidence that he appeared is major. So yeah, I'd have to go with that. But that's not Festinger.
That's fine. So, Dr. Habermas, once again, I want to thank you profoundly. I hope you're not disappointed with us. I think that anytime you come in, it's a pleasure for all of us. It's very nice to hear somebody of your intellectual stature explore things like this. I think you're a wonderful, wonderful man, and even better scholar.
That's very kind, and part Canadian.
Part Canadian. Wow, nice.
I told you that last time. Yeah, part of my family's from Canada, and my wife who passed away.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I apologize. You mentioned that your mother also passed away, and I'm so sorry to
my mom. No, my dad passed away just before Christmas.
Your father, right? I'm so sorry.
But my wife, who passed away at the age of 43, her whole family was Canadian, and my grandfather's Canadian. We used to go back to the Peterborough area for family reunions. And
I would be happy to meet up in person if you're ever in Toronto.
You're in Toronto? Is that right?
Yeah.
I've been there a few times. You know Tyndale University? Tyndale College University? Tyndale University College. I've taught whole classes there three different times.
Yeah,
So,
it was nice. Dr. Habermas, once again, this was a pleasure. Anytime you come on, it's really nice. Thank you, and God bless you. And we hope to hear a lot from you. God bless. God bless.
thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right, take care. All right, everybody, that's it. I'll see you guys. Thanks so much, everybody, for your support. Thank you so much. We got some more exciting stuff coming up, but that's it for today. All right, everybody, God bless. Take